All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Isabel Lee, and I'm one of the program managers at Haymarket HQ. And today we have a very special workshop in conjunction with the Spark Festival 2021, and it's all about venturing abroad successfully. So today we're going to be talking about some of the best practices, common mistakes, and sharing some of the resources and support that is available for you as a founder, a startup, or a small business. And we're going to be drawing on the experiences of our wonderful speakers and, of course, some of the insights that we've learned over the last couple of years. So, next one. So just as an introduction, if you're unfamiliar with us, we are Haymarket HQ. We help tech companies expand into new markets, whether that's Australian companies going overseas or international companies coming in. So we do that through our market entry programs. And you might have heard of perhaps the Vietnam Business Booster or the Sydney Landing Pad, China Canvas Challenge. We also have a wide global network of partners and investors. And of course, we have our famous co-working space based in Chinatown. So if you're looking for flexible space at the moment, feel free to email us and we'll see what we can do. All right, this is the exciting part, which is, introducing our speakers for today. And we're very, very lucky to be joined by Cynthia Dearin, who is the founder of Dearin Associates, Cynthia has had more than 20 years of experience helping international companies expand. She used to be the CEO of the Australian Arab Chamber of Commerce, and she very excitingly published her second book called Business Beyond Borders, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then we also have Ian Yip, who is the founder and CEO of Avertro, a cybersecurity company, which is winning awards left, right, and center. Over the last couple of years, or in his career, he's had various leadership positions in big tech companies across Asia and Europe. So he's a great person to speak to if you are a tech company. And of course, we have our CEO of Haymarket HQ, Duco, who will be doing the moderating during the panel. So Duco, of course, is the founding CEO of Haymarket HQ. And together over the last couple of years, we've helped over 700 companies expand into new markets. All right, so just to quickly go over today's agenda, we will have our panel discussion for about 20 or so minutes, and we're going to be speaking to Ian and Cynthia about their experiences. And then we're going to move on to the more practical elements, which is the breakout room. So each of you will be separated into a room where you will be asked about your company, what are your goals, and receive a bit of feedback. And you can also ask any questions there. And then we'll come together again at the end, where we'll just talk a little bit about an overview of the resources and support that's available for you if you're looking to expand into a new market. And if we have time, we'll open up for questions as well. So hopefully everyone is excited, but I might pass it on to Duco then.
Cool, thanks Isabel, and welcome everyone. I checked out who's attending today, a bunch of tech companies. We see some people from government, so it's a good diverse group of companies today, so welcome. Today, like Isabel said, we're going to listen to some of the experts, and I'm going to put myself completely outside of that because we have Cynthia and Ian here. Ian running a successful tech company, like Isabel mentioned, going everywhere. Cynthia, very broad experience helping companies into various different markets. So I have a bunch of questions prepared for them, but I'd also love to know from you, if you have any general questions, throw them in the chat, and then I'll try and pick those up. But also, if you have more company-specific questions, feel free to sort of keep them to yourself, and then we'll discuss them in the breakout room. We have plenty of time to sort of ask questions. Now, before I ask all the questions, I might just quickly ask Cynthia and Ian to give me a 1-minute introduction of themselves, because we may not have captured all of their experience. Cynthia, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, look, I'll do it very briefly. I won't talk about what I did in the past. Go read LinkedIn if you want to find that out. Essentially, these days, my team and I help companies to scale into international markets, and we primarily work with companies turning over $1 and $20 million. The focus of our work is helping those companies to develop and then execute their strategy so that they can actually get into international markets without making lots of expensive mistakes. So that is what I do.
Cool, thank you. Ian, how about you?
Yeah, so 20 years in cyber. I'll focus on more recent. Avertro is just over 2 years old now, so we started 2019. Based in Sydney, Australia. I have some international experience, but we very deliberately went after Singapore with the help of the market and the New South Wales government as well. So we were part of the Going Global program that they have. And I personally have a bunch of relationships in that market as well. So we're expanding overseas as we speak. And then obviously other countries. I mean, we were looking at the UK recently, and obviously the US is a big market for us. So some of the insights as to what we're thinking through, but our customer base still very much is focused on Australia just for now.
Cool. Thank you. And I'll briefly share a little bit about my background. So in case you're wondering where the accent is from, I'm Dutch. Spent 8 years in China helping mostly industrial tech companies enter the market, and then came to Australia a little bit over 5 years ago, where together with Isabel and our team, we mostly work with tech companies that want to expand into new markets. And I run a small family office on the side that invests in tech companies as well. Cool. So over to the questions. Again, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep talking. And the first thing I'd like to focus on, and the questions I have, I want to keep them a little bit fun, a little bit informal as well. I think a lot of the people in this room are sort of figuring out the next step. Should I go abroad? How do I go abroad? What can go wrong? So I have sort of the questions designed for that as well. And one of the key things I think I'd like to focus on is sort of touching upon what Cynthia already said, is what are the most common mistakes you see companies make? Because going abroad can be very costly exercise. So it's not something that you want to do wrong, so to say, but obviously there's lots of learnings involved as well. Cynthia, do you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Look, this is a massive question, and I could probably stand up here and talk about mistakes all day, right? And I love talking about mistakes, so we could be here till midnight. But for the sake of brevity, let me pick out 3 that I see all the time and that basically have the capacity to get people stopped in the journey very, very early on. So the first one that I see really frequently is a real lack of vision around the international expansion. So people often come to work with us or find themselves in international markets in a kind of ad hoc way. So a lot of people start going global because a random order comes through the door, or sometimes people are like, I've always wanted to live in Japan, for example, let's open a branch of the company there. Or I even know people who went on holiday to Bali, couldn't find a particular product and decided that they would develop their product, be the distributor for that product into Bali. And that's how they developed the business plan. So no lack of vision. When you start out like that, it's like getting in the car and driving around without a destination in mind. You get lost. How do you know when you've turned up? How do you know what success looks like when you've got to success? So it kind of happens all back to front. That is mistake number 1. Second big mistake that I see all the time is that people choose the wrong market. And I guess this is often, quite often linked to the first one because it happens in an ad hoc way. Somebody says, oh, I've heard there are big opportunities in, market X. And the person thinks, oh, well, all my mates are doing market X, maybe I should do market X. Or again, a random order comes in, or they get some traffic through e-commerce and they think this has got to be it. So people don't put the time in to make a decision based on data about which market they should be targeting. They do it emotionally, they do it slightly irrationally, they do it in an ad hoc way. And that means that often they target a market that is okay, but is not as good as a different market. They could have gone to a different market and gotten a better result. It often means they waste time and they waste money. And in the worst case, they pick a market that is actually wrong for what they're trying to sell. It blows up in their face. They have to pull out and start all over again. And the net result of that for some companies is that they are so burned and so put off by the experience that they throw up their hands and say, all too hard, we're just going to stay home. And I think that is a huge shame because it doesn't have to be like that, but that's the second mistake. And the third one I would mention is just, lack of strategy. So I often have people coming to me saying, oh, I need, I want to do a distribution agreement to go into this market. And can you help us and point us in the direction of helping getting the bank account set up or whatever? And I'm like, okay, so what's the vision for this? What are the goals? What's the work plan? They're like, oh, well, no, we don't need to worry about that. We're just going to start here with these agreements. And so the process is tipped on its head and people start from the weeds, trial and error it, and then make all these mistakes as they go and learn that way. But again, that is extremely expensive in terms of time, money, and opportunity costs. So I think if you can get a really clear vision about what you're trying to do over the next 5 years, you get some really good direction on what market you're going to go to based on data, and you take the time to actually work out a strategy and then turn that into an action plan, you're going to be way better set up than if you fall in love with somewhere and decide this is where we have to sell our product, and then try and start, at the kind of grassroots level and work upwards.
Cool, thank you. A lot of information there, and I can relate to a lot of that. And Ian, I'm kind of curious to hear your viewpoint, because you're sort of going through that now. You said, hey, you've gone through the New South Wales Going Global program to go into Singapore, but you also said, well, we're still focused on Australia. What's your view on this? What are some of the mistakes that you feel you may have made or that you could have avoided?
Yeah, I mean, so even though I'm fairly experienced, I still get advice from other people. So I did speak to a very, very, he's now very rich, but he's a tech founder in Silicon Valley, and just working through some of these international expansion plans with him. And he said, look, you got to be careful that you're not distracting yourself, because if you distract yourself, then you lose your core business anyway. So what's the point, right? One of the mistakes businesses make is they go too early and they distract from the core business, which is why I'm saying we cannot lose our base in Australia, because we will distract ourselves. The second question we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to put in the time and the money it takes to do this properly? It is not free. It is my time. It is dollars. You got to do marketing. You got to possibly hire people. You've got to maybe get consultants to help you. You've got to do the R&D in terms of go-to-market strategy, kind of like Cynthia was talking about. It is time consuming. It is financially consuming as well in terms of being able to do that. So we had to think through all those things. And then thirdly, do you know anything about the market, right? If you know nothing about market, then why are you going there? Are you willing to put in the work? And then secondarily, can you connect? So one of the things, Haymarket and the New South Wales government helped us do is just augment the relationships I already had, just to build on that and to give us the confidence that we knew we had as much support as we could gather, right? So it's all about gathering support and then just going when you've done the homework. Ultimately, I think it comes down to doing the homework and making sure that you're willing to pay for it and to put in the time and effort to do it. And even then, you may not be successful. It does take time, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll just talk about our experiences so far. One of the biggest challenges for us right now is the elephant in the room. It's COVID, right? So if you understand cultures, you talk about Asia specifically, Asia appreciates the face-to-face, and it's something we haven't been able to do now. So that's one of the challenges that didn't put up in front of us. So we've had to think through, okay, how can I work around that fact? How can I plan for the day I physically can go to Singapore, and in the meantime, lean on people I know there, channel partners, which I know I'm jumping gun a little bit, but channel partners, people you can hire there, advisors, and so on.
Yeah, cool. And just a sort of segue here. So you're focused on Singapore. Why not say the US? I mean, I think Cynthia sort of said, as one thing that I picked up from what Cynthia was saying was like, oh, because my mate is going there, I want to go there too. I hear that a lot in the context of the US. The holy grail for any company to go into is the US. At least that's how it's perceived. I haven't heard you say the US just yet, except for your friend in Silicon Valley. So why are you focused on Singapore?
For us, and it's all down to strategy, right? Our go-to-market strategy plan properly. The US is expensive. Ultimately, we've done some budgeting. We started planning for the US last year. Fact of the matter is, and I'm oversimplifying it, we need $1 million in cash to burn just to go after the US because of what we do and what it takes and the things that the market needs and how complex it is. So a lot of it is, well, do I want to burn $1 million of cash just to do it, right? And distract. It is also very distracting. So it's more, are you ready to do it? Are you willing to do it? And for us, like I said, I asked ourselves that hard question, and we're not ready to do the US in anger just yet, both financially and both in terms of just being distracted. Now, Singapore for us made sense because of my background, my relationships, the proximity to Australia, the support from Haymarket and the New South Wales government, and a lot of things. So we could offset the potential cost of doing things by stuff we already had. So it made sense. And then as far as a market to go after, it was also a good proving ground, because even though I can go and try and pitch to everyone that cybersecurity is a global challenge that we can solve, there's nothing like actual proof that you can do it. So for us, Singapore is a good proving ground to say, we're not just solving a problem for Australia, we're solving an international problem, and look, here's the proof of it. And then we do literally have a plan to go after the US in 2022, which we're working towards.
Cool. So one of the things you said was, we need to be ready to go into the US, right? Now, maybe I'll go back to Cynthia real quick. We have a lot of companies that come to HQ that say, oh, we want to expand to China, or we want to expand here or there, that we feel may not really be ready. But how do you know if you're ready as a company? Are there any benchmarks? When should you be thinking about this?
Well, look, I mean, we don't have a hard and fast rule, but we definitely prefer to work with companies that have already got, solid revenue of at least like a bare minimum of $1 million. And people sometimes look at me a bit sideways and are like, well, isn't that a bit discriminatory? And I say, look, I don't want to set anybody up for success. So if somebody comes to work with us, we want to know that we can say to them, look, you need to commission some market research, or you're going to need to do some trips, or maybe you're going to need to hire somebody. Some of the things that Ian just mentioned, needing $1 million to burn. Not every company might need to have $1 million free to burn, but you're going to need free cash for a start. So, if you're looking around saying, gosh, my Australian business is going down the drain, I'm going to try and rescue it by doing an international expansion. Let's leave COVID aside, because COVID has created some difficult circumstances. But if you were saying that in 2019, I'd be like, I think we need to get the foundations of your company stable first. So like going overseas is not going to solve problems about the fundamental functioning of your company. If you've got to a point where you've saturated the market and you're like, I have one client that has done so well in their field that they've got 60% of market share. They turn over about $10 million, and they came along and said, look, we've got to 60% market share. We know we're going to struggle to get more than that. We've been bought out by a global major in our space. And so our solution to this is we are now going to get into Southeast Asia. That is a perfect candidate for international expansion. They've already done really well in their space. They're now trying to maintain that 60% market share. But for them, it's time to go out and pick out markets in Asia where their sector is growing really rapidly, and where they can actually get in and take market share quite rapidly. So that is a company that is ready. But I would say, you've got to look at, and we have a thing called the robust reality checker, where it really looks at 12 areas of the business. I won't go through all of them now because it would take up too much time. But essentially, we look at, where are your systems in the company? Like, are you keeping your accounts and your receipts in a shoebox under the bed? Okay, definitely not ready to go global. Are you doing financial dashboarding? No, we need to get that in place. Do you have an SOP for every process in your company, and is your team trained on all the SOPs? That's standard operating procedures. If you don't have that, you need to work on that, because if you've got chaos in the company and you scale it, what happens? Well, you scale the chaos, which is like definitely not something that you want to do. Have you got the right team? Is the team equipped to do this? Are they bought into the vision? Do they have the right skills? If you're targeting China and you have no Mandarin speakers in your team, you are setting yourself up for a really hard time. You've got nobody who understands China. So, you have to have that. And we basically work around this series of 12 indicators, and we say, where are you at with each of these things? Now, you don't have to be 10 out of 10, but if you're like 1 out of 10 on all of them, then you're setting yourself up to fail. So my key message is here, you need to have a company that is working properly. It doesn't have to be everything perfect, but it's got to be functioning well and throwing off cash. Like, unless you are well funded, if you are a startup that's got funding coming in because other people see promise, that's great. But if you're a startup that is bootstrapping everything and like living off the smell of an oily rag, it might not be the right time to start going global, because you're going to create an enormous amount of stress for yourself.
Yeah, good point. And I think especially, the tech scene is a little bit of an outlier.
Yeah.
Where you can get away with essentially no revenues and just funding until the investors say it's time to make some money now.
Yeah. If you've got cash, coming in, you can afford to experiment. You can afford to make mistakes. But if you've mortgaged your house and like you're depending on your own cash and there's no backup, there's a very limited number of mistakes that you can afford to make. And I get very nervous when I see people coming in with not much cash and huge expectations, and I'm like, they're relying on me to fix this for them, and I actually can't. Like, I can advise and guide to all the stuff, but at the end of the day, they are in the business, and if they make the wrong calls on this, it's going to blow up, and we don't want that. Like, we want people to have a little bit of leeway to be able to test and measure and experiment with things.
Okay, just in the interest of time, just some quick questions. What are the first few steps? Ian, maybe I'll start with you. What are some of the first few steps? To say, you run a tech company, You've worked in tech, so let's focus on tech for simplicity here for a minute. You're looking into expanding into new markets. What advice would you give to other tech founders? And I guess this applies to companies in general, but what are the first few steps that you take as you're expanding into a new country? So this is assuming you've already said, I want to go into Singapore, but say you don't know anyone there. What are the first few steps you take?
I think the first thing is your solution applicable in that country? There are nuances, even for cybersecurity in every country. I'll give you literally our example, right? We do solve a global challenge, but for example, the regulatory environment is different for every country. So there's laws there. That's the first thing. Number one, are you happy with the laws? Number two, is it a market you want to go after because can you solve their problems? The regulatory standards for cybersecurity are different in every country. So we had to go and understand, okay, if we were to go into Singapore, what are the nuances in the regulatory standards we would need to support? We didn't currently support that at the time. So we had to go and figure out how to support those things, right? So just understand the lay of the land of the landscape, because you're going to be asked those questions when you go into there and they go, well, what problem do you solve for me? You've got to be able to speak their speak, right? So for us, we did that market research, because if we couldn't solve the nuanced challenges that the Singapore market needed us to solve, then there was no point going to spend money in trying to get partners, and because we would still run in the same brick walls of partners. The partners ask the same questions: what problems do you solve here? Because the other question a lot of the customers they're going to ask is, you're a foreign company. Why do I need to go with a foreign company? What do you bring that's unique that I can't get from somebody here? Now, you can say your tech is unique, but even then, and I mean, we believe our tech is unique, but we still have to solve a challenge that is fit for purpose for that market before you do anything else, right? So that was the very first thing we had to do. It had to be in our roadmap. We had to prove we could do it. We had to do use cases. We had to kind of test it a little bit as well. So when we figured that out without just desktop research, just Google it, find things, understand kind of what you think it is, and then we had to go and confirm it, right? I said I understand the market, but I still had to go figure out who I could go and ask who understood the nuances of those regulations in Singapore and go, are our assumptions right? What about them are not right? Can you adjust and just iterate on that? And that's step one and step two.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. And I think that sort of lean methodology where you say, well, we've done a bit of desk research, but before we commit a ton of resources to it, let's go and validate these assumptions. I think that makes perfect sense. Cynthia, what would you suggest?
Look, I would totally agree with that. So I would have mentioned that product market fit piece of Ian had it. And the two pieces that I would say that kind of go around that is your ideal international client analysis. So there's no point getting into a market if you don't know that some of your ideal clients are there, because you can have the best marketing in the world, but if you don't know who that ideal client is and who they are, well, actually, if you don't have a clear ideal client avatar, you are not going to have the best marketing in the world anyway. But what I'm saying is you can do a lot of marketing, but if you don't know specifically who that is targeted to and what the real needs and requirements and desires of those people are, you are not going to be able to connect with them, and you probably won't be able to sell them something that's really going to fix a problem. And why are we in business? To fix problems. If we're not selling stuff that fixes a problem, we should go do something else, like get a different job. So there's the ideal client piece that's super important. There's the product market fit piece, and then there's what I like to call the will they pay piece. So sometimes people do not do the exercise of figuring out whether people are going to pay what they have in mind as the price point before they start. The pricing bit gets left to the end. And so people will design, build, market, and price kind of as an afterthought. And sometimes when you get into an overseas market, you find the expectations around price are completely different from what they are at home, even if you've worked successfully at home. And so that's a huge problem, because that can throw a spanner in the works. You've done all your financial modeling on a price point that you've got in mind. And when you get into market, you're like, oh, nobody's going to pay this price point. Gosh, all of our margins gone. Oh, look, we're in minus numbers. So I think you have to work out, are people going to pay what you are expecting as a premium before you start? Because you need to know, Ian's mentioned the amount of time and resource that going international sucks up, and that is very true. So you've got to work out, are we going to get a return on investment that's going to make all this blood, sweat, and tears worth it?
Yeah, no, for sure. Before I can relate to that. Before I went into tech, I was selling kids clothing in China, so European kids clothing, which at the time there weren't a whole lot of brands out there. And the biggest thing we were worried about is like, are they going to pay the same prices as they do back in Western Europe? Because those are high prices. So we were really worried about it. But then when we started marketing it, we found out that we could actually charge almost a 50% premium, and they were happy to pay it.
Yep.
So that happened to be a positive surprise, but unfortunately it often works the other way around.
Yeah. And sometimes people think they're going to go in and establish a beachhead, especially with traditional products. And they're like, well, we'll go in cheap until we get established and then we'll ramp the prices up. But the problem is, depending on the channel you're selling through, especially if you're supplying in large numbers, the expectation over time from the buyers is that they're going to be able to squeeze you for a deal and the price is going to go down.
Yeah.
And so, you've gone in low to get in, and then suddenly everyone's like, well, where's our deal? Like, we're going to squeeze you even further. And you're operating on fumes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Okay, so I will pass it off to Juko to talk a little bit about what are the resources and support available to anyone who is looking for international expansion.
Yes, thanks, Isabel. And I'll keep this very short. I think many of you are probably hungry, want to grab some lunch, or are eating lunch in the meantime with your camera off. Very smart. So I'll just quickly go through some support that you may not be aware of, and things that may save you some money and time, right? So I'll just go through it pretty quickly, but we'll have more information. Send us an email if you want a little bit more context as well. So first off, make sure that you check out government support. Meaning Australian government support. For instance, Austrade has a lot of great programs that are free for you to join as a company, but also look at your local state. In this case, I'll make the example of Investment New South Wales. Ian gave an example of, well, he went through the Going Global program. These are competitive programs as in to get into, but once you're in, these are free. You will get the support from the local government in country as well. So you can make very good use of the resources of the Australian government abroad. On top of that, there are various grants available as well. So one is the Export Market Development Grant. If you are eligible for that, that can subsidize a lot of your marketing costs. So just having a look at, well, what sort of government support is available by looking at Austrade, your local trade and investment bureau or agency, in this case, Investment New South Wales, as well as the grants, may be a huge money and time saver for you, and also increases your chances of success. So it'll be my first. Second is look at market entry programs abroad. There are plenty of programs in Europe, in Singapore, in South Korea, in South America, that essentially help you expand into the local market. A lot of times these are free programs, subsidized programs by the local governments because they want to attract foreign companies, and that can really help you increase your speed to market, help you build out your network quickly, and just sort of get a feel on whether or not that market is for you. So in the case of, for instance, the US, look at the Denver landing pad, set up a city government there. If you're looking to enter Europe, well, every European country has something to offer. For instance, my home country, Holland, has the orange carpet, where you get a visa, plus they'll connect you with a service provider or a bunch of consultants that can help you and answer all these questions. So there's a lot of support available from governments on both sides. Doing a quick Google search or shoot me an email and I'll be able to tell you the ones that I know about. Third, of course, had to plug it. Check out Cynthia's book that was just released. I've heard great stories about it. Business Beyond Borders, Take Your Company Global. We'll also see if we...
That's it there.
There we go. We'll see if we can negotiate a discount and send it to you in follow-up email. Also, we've created our own expansion canvas. So if you're mostly designed for, well, any kind of company, but particularly tech companies in mind, if you are thinking about expanding abroad, if you're looking for a framework to think through, well, what are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves, check out the expansion canvas. It's a one-pager. It just helps you organize your thoughts. It's completely free, and it may help you, give you a bit of direction. And then the last two is check out the networks that are outside in your target country. There are lots of Aussies abroad networks in, say, the US or Singapore, of people that are happy to give you a hand, connect you, and sort of may even be able to facilitate some connections to partners and clients. So getting involved in those networks is usually a good way to sort of get a feel for what's happening there. And last but not least, Australian Chambers of Commerce. These are, for instance, quite popular and useful in, say, Shanghai in China, where you really do need a little bit of hand-holding and other harder to enter markets. They have vetted lists of service providers, sometimes a program or two, and lots of events on useful topics. So these are just some of the examples of support that's out there. There's probably plenty more out there, but as you're starting out, these are some easy ways to get involved in your host country or to understand what's out there in terms of the support available to you. I said I wanted to keep it short, so I think I'll end it here. Over to you, Isabel.
Oh, thank you for that. We still have quite a little bit, or just a little bit of time left. And I just want to say, go to the next slide. Thank you for everyone for joining us. As I mentioned, I will be putting up the recording for any of the panel discussions that you may have missed out on. Our speakers are here. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to connect with you if you find them on LinkedIn. And before we wrap up, would like to say, if you do have any questions about expanding into a new market, if you are looking for a little bit of support, feel free to email us at HeyMarket HQ. We're more than happy to have a chat with you. And of course, because we are reopening next Monday, very much excited for that. If you're looking for a flexible office or just some place where you can work out of the house for a little bit, please come and visit us for a virtual tour. And I'll see you very soon, hopefully. And I will email you all the resources and the recording after this.